All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. This is an oil and gas listening session being offered on behalf of the Wyoming Business Council in cooperation with the Petroleum Association of Wyoming and the University of Wyoming. We've got a great list of panelists and discussion up for you today. Before we get underway, we will discuss some meeting logistics. Written questions may be submitted using the Q&A function from the webinar toolbar. We will answer those questions as time allows. Please do not use the chat feature for those questions. We might miss them. As we get through the meeting, we will allow individuals to ask questions live. And if you wish to speak, please use the raise your hand feature and we will call on you in turn. As a courtesy to other participants, we will remind our panelists to please keep your microphone muted at all times when you're not speaking so we can keep background noise to a minimum. And this session is being recorded and will be made available to the general public via the WBC website as soon as we can get it all assembled. To get us underway, I will turn it over to Wyoming Business Council CEO Josh Durrell. He has some introductory remarks and we'll introduce the rest of our panelists. So Josh, whenever you are ready, sir.
Great, thanks Warren, and thank you all for joining. It looks like we've got about 100 folks on the line in addition to the people on the panel. So a really good turnout so far, and I'm sure more people will join in. And we really wanted to make sure that we heard from and listened to the folks in the oil and gas industry as the task force that was really centered around COVID-19 was formed from the governor's office. We realized that it's not just COVID-19 that is affecting the oil and gas industry and many of the core industries that are in Wyoming. So we wanted to make sure that we reached out and listened in and felt, to be able to answer any of those questions that you might have immediately, and then also just to understand what we can be doing within the state government to help out. And so with that, we've got two folks that are also on board to help out with that as well. First, I'll introduce Ed Sinikowski. He is the Vice President for Research and Economic Development at the University of Wyoming. He'll be here mostly in a listening capacity to try to understand, again, what's going on in the industry and relate it to University of Wyoming items. And then we also have Pete Obermuller from the Petroleum Association of Wyoming, who will be doing the heavy lifting during this presentation. Pete, as you probably all know, has been doing a lot of heavy lifting anyway. So we'll be having him do a lot of talk. Before we turn it over to Pete, though, I do want to mention some of the things that have been going on with regards to COVID-19 and Wyoming. And just want to make sure that everybody understands some of the approaches that the state of Wyoming, as well as many other states in the union, are taking to make sure that the health and safety of our citizens is the #1 priority. We really do want to make sure that public health is at the forefront of this and shape policy around that. And as such, we've done a number of orders that have impacted business, but in the short run, but based on all of the economic modeling that's out there and the overall economic landscape will be better off because of these things. And there haven't been any specific restrictions on oil and gas. I know that many oil and gas companies are able to take advantage of the PPP and the other the EIDL SBA programs as well. And so we just wanted to make sure that everyone here understood that we're doing our best to make sure that Wyoming is strong to come out as we come out of this, and do our best to really look at things in terms of the urgent, the restart and recovery efforts that are going to be happening as this COVID-19 spread slows down, and then how do we position ourselves as Wyoming to come out of this a stronger and more diverse economy. So thank you all again for joining in today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing Pete, but most importantly, hearing from all of you about what you're facing and how we might be able to help. So thank you very much. And with that, we'll go ahead and go to that next slide and turn it over to Pete so he can take it away.
Thanks, Josh. Appreciate it. And welcome, everyone. My name is Pete Obermuller. I'm the president of the Petroleum Association of Wyoming. Noticing on the attendee list, there's a number of members of PAW on the call. Welcome. And there's also a number of folks who I don't recognize who may not be members of the Petroleum Association. Really appreciate you joining as well. Part of the reason for doing this was to make sure that we cast as wide a net as we could in the oil and gas industry, and particularly in the small and mid-sized companies and the oil field service companies, so that we could hear a little bit more information about what you're experiencing on the ground and the kind of things that we can collectively be focused on. So I just want to give a quick update on where we are right now, as much as I know it, and just give a really brief thumbnail sketch about the efforts that the Petroleum Association has been undertaking at both the state and federal level, in case you are unaware of those, and then would be eager to hear about additional ones that perhaps we need to focus on. So real quick, this in terms of rig count, there are, as last time I checked, could be less than this now, but as of Monday, I believe there were 7 rigs operating in Wyoming. That's down from 21 that were operating on the last day of the legislative session on March 13th. I tagged it to the legislative session just because obviously the state of Wyoming's budget was finalized on that day, and it made some assumptions about rig counts and production numbers and prices of oil and gas that are now obviously obsolete. So the state has some choices to make with regard to its future budget there. With regard to production and employment, that data is delayed. It's reported a little bit delayed, and then takes a little while to process it at OGCC and other agencies, so we don't quite know where it is right now. However, we do know, based on conversations with individual Petroleum Association members, that producing wells are being shut in at a very fast rate. And that, it's a general rule of thumb, every rig that's laid down results in about 100 displaced jobs. I use that word intentionally, displaced, because as you all know, oftentimes workers attached to a rig will just move to wherever the rig moves. And that might take place in a situation where Wyoming is a little bit distressed, but other basins are not. Well, we're not in that case now. Every basin is distressed. So a rig lay down doesn't necessarily mean it's going somewhere else. It likely means that it's being stacked currently. So that's the bad news. I wanted to talk just real quickly about a few of the efforts that the association has been making to respond to the immediate needs related to the coronavirus, and then pivot a little bit to what we're looking towards for an eventual recovery. Because I do think a recovery will happen, and we can take steps right now that help that recovery go faster, and hopefully bring people back and increase production again. So really it boils down to, with respect to the immediate crisis, of course, other states, as you all know, not Wyoming, but a lot of other states had stay-at-home orders, and that affected corporate headquarters for some of our operators that operate in Wyoming. And in addition, just the general efforts here in Wyoming, based on the governor's orders to stay at home, have impacted people's ability to meet the various regulatory requirements for all of the agencies that require reports and filings and payments and those sorts of things. So immediately what the association worked towards doing is putting a little bit of pushing the pause button a little bit and relaxing some of those requirements, so that in-person signatures weren't necessary, so that payments could be done electronically as opposed to physical checks, and that certain deadlines could be delayed without penalty. So the agencies have responded in various ways. Most of them have responded pretty favorably, and I'm happy to run through all those. I don't want to take a lot of time on it, but anyone's welcome to reach out to me to talk about it. Essentially, it boils down to In the case of leases and APDs for exploration and production, both at state lands and at the federal government, they're both operating on a case-by-case basis, and so I have asked operators to reach out. As it relates to royalty reductions on federal lands, the Washington BLM office has directed that can happen on a lease-by-lease basis with applications at the state office. And that's been a little bit tricky as there's not been guidance about that. However, PAW and other attorneys are working on a potential template application, and we're working with the state BLM office to help ease their burden on that as well, so that we can get that out to all operators, large and small, to be able to apply for temporary royalty relief on a lease-by-lease basis, to the extent that the national the legislature or the national office doesn't go to blanket royalty relief. With respect to state severance tax, the Department of Revenue has agreed to waive late payment interest and penalties on severance tax during this time. So I encourage you to reach out to them on that as well. Ad valorem tax, property tax, a little more complicated, of course, because it involves local governments, and so that and is set by statute. So there's a little bit rigidity with respect to ad valorem. Finally, with the Department of Environmental Quality, you may have seen that both EPA and WDEQ issued specific guidance related to inspections and inventories and other reports required by the WDEQ. If you haven't seen that, please reach out and we will make that available. I just want to stress there, some of the press reports about it have been a little disappointing in the sense that they have alleged that this is a free pass for oil and gas, and it's not. We don't view it that way. It's not a free pass. It is a temporary pause given this unprecedented situation we find ourselves in. And both EPA and DEQ are requiring that companies document any cases where they might miss some sort of filing or inspection or something like that, and the reason for it, and make sure that communication line is open. So we can talk more about that too as we go along. Shifting real quickly, and then I'll wrap up here to future recovery items. Probably the most important thing that the association is working on with related to recovery in the oil and gas sector is related to any regulatory requirement or payment that is not really necessary right now, that could be back into the hands of individual companies in order to improve cash flow and liquidity and to keep capital in the hands of industry, is what we're trying to accomplish right now. So that's a number of things, but basically the effort is to not try to force a negative incentive so that any operator has no choice but to plug and abandon a well. If we're going to have a number of shut-in wells, 50% or larger of shut-in wells, then what Wyoming needs to do is keep those in a shut-in status and not force plug or produce decisions during this unprecedented time. Let's leave those there so that we can restart as fast as possible. It also includes bonding and of course royalty relief. So without getting super far into the weeds on any of those, that's essentially the direction that we've been working on, and I'm happy to take more questions about that, and most importantly hear other ideas that you have that we all collectively can be working on.
So with that, Pete, I think we can jump into more of a listening session, right? And Peter, hopefully you're still there. Did you want to kind of frame up these two questions, Pete, or I can as well? But I think from you, it probably makes a lot more sense. So.
Sure. Thanks, Josh. Happy to do it. I think, I don't know to what extent callers on this have made use of the programs and possible assistance available at the Business Council or other state agencies. I can't even claim to be an expert on all of them. So what we wanted to hear from you all was first, what's your experience on the ground? Where are you in terms of the decisions you've had to make to keep your doors open and all of that? And what things have you found that haven't been working well that you need us to collectively, either your association, this association, or the state to do a better job on? But then what we really wanted to ask you to do, and it puts you on the spot right now, so we're welcome input afterwards. I think Josh will talk more about that. But when the crisis eases, Wyoming will come back. And there simply isn't a scenario where Wyoming comes back without the oil and natural gas economy coming back. It just isn't going to happen. So we need to make sure that we have made the best effort we can to ease that recovery for this industry. And that's where you all come in. I won't pretend to know what all those things are. And so you all have way more experience, and I'd love to hear those. So what sort of private solutions are there that can make that happen? Whether it's a better job at shortening supply chains with respect to safety and cleaning equipment and those sorts of things, or whether it's a public solution that I can engage with the state and collectively with you all to make sure that you're set up for success.
As a reminder to all participants, if you have questions, you may submit those using the Q&A tool from your webinar toolbar. We will answer those as time allows. Anyone wishing to answer a question live, please use the raise your hand feature. We will call on you in turn, and you'll be allowed to state your questions.
So Pete, as we wait for some of those first questions, do you want to talk a little bit more about some of the questions you've been getting, or some of the things you've been hearing, in addition to the comments you had before, some of the more specific things?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, probably the most challenging thing right now, particularly for those operators operating on public lands, is how to engage with the BLM. And that has been difficult because the situation has been fluid. There were efforts in the United States Congress to try to have royalty relief in the phase 3 package of the coronavirus response that was blocked, and the department fell back on its existing authority, which is lease by lease. And I think that shift at the Washington office caught the states by surprise a little bit, and so they weren't really prepared for an influx of requests with respect to individual royalty relief. So that's an issue we're working to try to resolve as we speak. So that's been one. The other one is on payroll protection. I'd be interested to hear from people on this call, particularly if you're a small business that was eligible, would have been eligible, how that worked, if you were if you were successful, or if not, why not? And one of the issues we've been working on there, of course, is some of the aggregate employee limits under the PPP program excluded oil and gas, I think inadvertently. But if there is a phase 4, we're trying to overcome that as well, so that any new money pumped into the payroll protection program is eligible for all oil and gas.
Yeah, and Pete, that brings up a really good point too. Just so everyone on the call knows, not only do we have Pete on board to answer questions, but we also have Amy Lee from the SBA. She's our regional director on the SBA, and so I know she's been working nonstop on those programs in the last week or two. And then we also have Director Cooley from Workforce Services, who is available to answer any questions that you might have when it comes to workforce and unemployment and those kinds of things. So we have a number of folks on the line to answer those questions if they come up.
We do have a couple of written questions submitted. Anyone wishing to ask a question live, please use the raise your hand feature. The first question comes from Colleen Faber. Are there discussions related to extending permits or waive fees for those permits that may be expiring in the next 6 months or to a year with state and federal agencies?
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. Appreciate that question. And the answer is yes. I didn't get into that very much, but probably two of the, I talked about making sure that companies were not in a position of having to make negative decisions in the short term based on the crisis. And some of that has to do with holding on to capital, but a lot of it has to do also with holding on to permits and leases. Most of you know on the call, of course, that you have to hold by production in a lot of, in state lands and in federal leases. Well, production is not happening for obvious reasons right now, and losing that position would be another setback for recovery in Wyoming. So we have asked both federal Department of Interior and state lands for extensions of leases, those that come up here in the next few months, without having to meet that production requirement, so that they can hold on to their positions and make decisions about those wells when it is more economical to do so. On the federal level, this is just me editorializing right now, but those asks, the non-royalty relief related asks, which was a big part of what the Petroleum Association asked the federal government for, those have been bottled up in the discussion of royalty relief. So we have asked our delegation, we continue to push the Department of Interior to focus on the non-royalty relief regulatory asks, clear those out, and we can fight the fight on royalty relief as an ongoing matter. But the extension of leases and permits is pretty important at both there and the state and at the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. I should note, not to drone on here, Josh, sorry, but with respect to the OGCC, most of you on this call know that they made a pretty drastic change with regard to permitting in Wyoming. It became the rule at, I think, December 20th or something like that. And that has very specific timelines related to when you file and when you can file a competing application and when you have to protest the competing application and all of that. We have asked them, and we have followed up with the governor, to push the pause button on those so that everyone's on the same playing field when things get back to normal. Currently, OGCC has indicated that they are unwilling to do that, and that they will just try to solve those issues after the fact using quote unquote common sense. We're still pushing on that, and we don't think that that's necessarily the appropriate way to handle this current crisis with respect to APDs and permits at the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission.
We have another question coming in on the question line. What do you say to those who say that the virus has totally destroyed the demand for oil and prices have not made any gains?
Well, I mean, I would say that they're right. The demand, to a certain extent, they're right. The demand collapse is really the biggest problem, and you've seen that even with the OPEC plus agreement to drop supplies by 10 million barrels. That's not enough. The demand crunch is so dramatic that is what is causing obviously the price collapse and the storage backup and the rig laydowns and all of that. So from my standpoint, we won't see a recovery in the United States or in Wyoming until demand goes back up. Now, if you were arguing that there are those who are saying that this spells the end of oil and gas, that I don't buy. when we're able to get back to normal, there's going to be a lot of pent-up demand for travel and business gatherings and all the sorts of things that drive our economy, and demand will go back up. So the question for us is, can we create a climate in Wyoming that is ready to respond when that happens? And it will happen, and we just need to be ready for it.
Warren,
Any
how are we? Sorry, go ahead, Warren.
Any participants wishing to ask questions may use the raise your hand feature. We can get you on the line live, or you may submit your questions via the Q&A tool. We are getting to those rather quickly. Another question come in here. First, we'll go to Mr. Paul Ulrich. Paul, you are on the line. Please state your question.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Paul Ulrich. I am Vice President of Jonah Energy and also Chairman of PAW. First and foremost, I want to thank Pete, Josh, Amy, and Director Cooley for hosting this event. I think it's critical. Pete, you did a good job outlining of the recent concerns. A couple additional points I certainly want to make, and then I've got a question. We've seen the natural gas industry in dire straits for quite some time, in addition to the recent oil, obviously massive drop in oil, which has stressed every single producer in the state. It's right, as of today, there are 7 rigs operating in the state of Wyoming. And I do see that number continuing to decrease on a daily basis. In addition to that, prices have absolutely not rebounded as we all expected. The short-term and long-term financial and revenue impacts to the state of Wyoming, and certainly all of us in the private sector, are going to be enormous. And I just want to applaud all of you for giving us an opportunity to have a discussion about that, and hopefully collectively chart a path forward out of this, with an understanding that we're talking about short and long solutions for the state. The job loss is devastating over in Southwest Wyoming, where I operate, and it's desperately needed. To that point, and perhaps Director Cooley may be the best individual to answer that. In addition to the recent availability of funds and payroll protection, et cetera, are there other outlets through DWS and programs, perhaps in other agencies, that we as an industry need to start taking a look at to do exactly what Pete mentioned, and that is protect our cash flow in this dire time?
First off, Josh and Pete and Amy, thank you for having me here today. As you know, earlier, we did release through Workforce Services layoff aversion funds for business in Wyoming. We had a pot of money from our rapid response funds, which are, as you'll recall, when Black Jewel closed down, rapid response funds are what allow us to go in and respond by providing information, written and informational sessions about the availability of unemployment, other benefits, retraining, upskilling, resume writing, all of those activities. Those rapid response funds are what help us respond to those types of layoffs. So we took some of the money from rapid response with the approval of Department of Labor and put those towards the layoff aversion funds. I don't think that we really had an idea about of the need for that money out there, but as I think a lot of you know, those funds were obligated very quickly after they were released. So we are looking through additional funding sources we might have within the office. to put out another round of layoff aversion funds, something similar to what we did with that funding stream. So I would just ask you all to please be watching for that, and we will announce it equally across the state, so all participants have an equal opportunity to apply for that funding. You know, of course, you've all heard about unemployment and the CARES Act benefit programs that are going to be coming out here hopefully very shortly. I know that doesn't help you necessarily in terms of keeping business open, but certainly it can help you in terms of if you do have to do furloughs or short-term layoffs for your employees. Those are some very good benefits that are going to be coming out for employees with the, not only are they for individuals that previously might not have been covered by state unemployment insurance benefits, but also there's a $600 per week addition to any UI benefits, and those benefits are going to be extended out 13 weeks beyond what they normally applicants would receive. So those are the programs. Those are programs that we have up and coming. In particular, the layoff aversion funds are ones that we are hoping to have up and coming here in the next, I don't know, the next month, I would hope. Without giving you any deadlines or timelines on that, that's just what we're looking at. So I think those are the programs I'm aware of. I'm not aware of other outreach sources. Amy might be more alert to some of those potentially for small business.
Thank you for that, Director Cooley. You know, I think that working through the Paycheck Protection Program, which may or may not be an ideal situation for your business, and understanding that the intent of that provision in the CARES Act is to really cover us for a very short-term period of time. It can be used for an 8-week period of time to cover payroll, mortgage interest, utilities, and just very limited expenses for that period of time for those who are making the choice to keep their employees on their payroll and keep them working. If that's the best decision for your business at this time, that may be a resource that can assist you. The SBA also has an economic injury disaster loan program, which is our only direct loan program, and that is available at sba.gov/disaster. That was the working capital loan program that came online through the governor's initial declaration in working very closely with the Business Council and businesses around the state to ensure that we were included in that. And what that makes available are working capital loans of up to $2 million. That is intended to not replace revenues, but can be used to make more payments than were used or are usable under the Paycheck Protection Program. Under that program, you can pay accounts payable, you can also pay payroll, you can pay other working capital needs that you may have. Those loans can go up to 30 years and they're low interest, 3.75%. Those are two of the programs that we have available. As you're looking at your strategic plans and meeting with your management teams about what to do next, one suggestion I would offer that SBA is involved in is, and this may not be a fit for every company, but it might help some, is to consider whether or not there's an opportunity for your company to pivot and consider government contracting, whether there might be an opportunity to do business with the federal government in a different realm than maybe you've done. I think it's going to take all of us a lot of creativity to get through this time and looking at different opportunities. And if that is something that might be worth considering for your company, I want you to know that in Wyoming, we have the Procurement Technical Assistance Center. That is a program that is funded federally by the Defense Logistics Agency and receives Wyoming Business Council funding, and is hosted by the University of Wyoming as part of the Wyoming Small Business Development Center Network. My team has a co-sponsorship agreement in place with the PTAC, so we do our government contracting training hand in hand with the PTAC. We work very closely with them, and what SBA also does on the government contracting side is we work behind the scenes with different federal agencies to advocate for small businesses and ensure that they have the most opportunity possible. So, like I say, it maybe not something that can help you in the immediate term, but as you're meeting with your management teams, perhaps worthy of consideration in a longer term.
We have another question on the line. Has any further progress been made to put more volume into the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to cut some of the excess storage? Do you expect this will happen at some point?
Thanks, Commissioner Faber, for that question as well. The answer is yeah, there has been progress. Initially, again, thanks to some partisan sniping, the purchasing of oil into the Strategic Petroleum Reserve was blocked, which would have obviously met a strategic purpose of buying really low and storing it and selling high. But in the absence of being able to do that, they did in fact halt what were required sales from it, from the SPRO, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, and then they are in negotiations with several companies to lease space in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in the very near term to free up storage bottlenecks, particularly in the south and along the Gulf Coast, which would have a trickle up effect, I guess, all the way up to us, which would allow our storage capacity issues to free as well.
Another question on the line. What would you anticipate regarding timing and the likelihood of blanket approval for federal royalty relief below a certain oil price? Or do you think that it is more likely it will continue to be handled on an individual basis with the state office?
Well, so I think blanket relief is probably going to happen via legislative action, and a phase 4 package seems remote right now in terms of what it would look like. That doesn't mean there won't be a phase 4. I think they are going to have to pump more money into the payroll protection program. But whether or not there will be additional energy related items in there or not is anyone's guess. So for the time being, I think it will be handled on a case-by-case basis at the state office, and hopeful to help streamline that process as quickly as possible.
We have another question. If we see a series of bankruptcies in the oil and gas sector that affect Wyoming operators, could we see a number of wells abandoned by operators and leave the state of Wyoming with the liability of plugging and rehabbing a large number of oil and gas wells, much like we saw with the coal bed wells in the Powder River Basin?
Yeah, I actually think that that we might want to use this time to think a little bit more critically about our bonding policies and our strategy with respect to bonding in Wyoming. We're in a much different position now than we were with coal bed methane. And so in terms of the state holding the bag, the state doesn't hold the bag on bonding because operators pay both conservation tax and are also required to do pretty significant idle well bonding in order to prevent precisely what you're asking. Just to put a couple numbers on it here, I won't overwhelm you with numbers, but if you take the total number of currently idled wells, so that's before this whole thing, but and you assumed that it takes $10 per foot of open well bore to plug and abandon those orphan wells. $10 is what both the state lands and the Oil and Gas Commission essentially charges across the board. The actual legislation says up to 10, but there's basically no negotiation. It's $10 as I understand. But if you assume that it would take all $10 per foot to plug and abandon all of the orphan wells, we would need about $26 million to do that in Wyoming. Right now, the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, according to their supervisor's report, most recently holds over 158 million in idle well bonds. So we have, at least in the current situation, we have quite a lot there, and not to mention the conservation tax. So in terms of being able to restart, I think that from an energy strategy and an economic recovery strategy standpoint, our bonding policies should be open to discussion.
As a reminder, participants wishing to ask a question live may click the raise your hand feature, and we will get to your questions in turn. We have another question on the line. If Wyoming moves into a shelter-in-place order, do you anticipate any different restrictions or guidance for critical or essential infrastructure workers?
I might turn that over to you, Josh, in case, or anyone else from the task force, in case you have any updated information on that. My understanding from public statements from the governor is there is no intention to go to a stay-at-home order, but that if we do, that general Homeland Security CISA guidance would be followed in that case. But there may be further updates from folks on the panel that might know more about that.
No, I think you covered it perfectly, Pete. That's our understanding as well. Warren, if I can jump in for just a second, I did want to mention we also have Karen Godman on the line from OSHA, and Karen, I'm not sure if you have a few words to say, or you want to kind of chime in with some of the questions or some of the situations that you've been handling over the last few weeks. To give maybe some guidance to other folks, but if possible, we'd sure like to hear from you.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you. I am the director of Wyoming OSHA, and we have been receiving complaints, but we've also been putting guidance out for employers to use. While right now we do not have anything specific to the oil and gas industry, I do want to share that we do have resources available to help if any employers are interested in developing or looking at how do they adjust to the current pandemic, how do they protect employees. We do have a lot of resources on our website, but we are also happy to help. So if a question arose or an employer wanted help, that opportunity is always available. They can contact us online or on the phone at our main number. And we also have the compliance side of the house too. You know, if there was a complaint or a concern about that. But I just want to share that those resources are available to employers and to employees, and we are working and are very busy right now, but we're happy to help employers through this time as well.
Thank you very much, Karen. Did that spawn any questions or feedback from the audience?
Nothing specific. We do have an unrelated question, however. For independent contractors, consultants, there has been confusion regarding the EIDL and PPP programs. Could we get some clarification for guidance for these folks?
Sure. You know, when we're looking at guidance, it's changing all the time. This pandemic is changing. OSHA guidance is changing. CDC guidance is changing. I can let you know that when we're talking about COVID, we are looking at the employer assessing risk. So that's really looking at who has exposure and how the employer rates that, and then PPE associated with that. So it's really going to depend on the classification that an employer makes about the hazards that perhaps their employees are exposed to and what's required. So it's going to be more on a case-by-case situation and how that employer assesses risk for their employees doing work.
Yeah, and Karen, I think that actually this question was about the SBA loans, but I think your particular answer was good on a completely different level, and I'm glad you covered it for personal protective equipment and how that should be covered. So thank you for doing that. It was fortuitous, but now we'll turn it over to Amy Lee to talk a little bit about those SBA programs.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So as far as the regulatory guidance, that has been an unfolding process, and we do have some more as of yesterday. So in one of the original, in the original interim final rule, independent contractors count as employees for purposes of PPP loan forgiveness. The answer is no. Independent contractors have the ability to apply for a PPP loan on their own. So they do not count for the purpose of a borrower's PPP loan. Additional guidance came out yesterday in the form of another interim final rule. These are posted on the Treasury website. If you go to the Treasury website and you click on the small business banner that basically is front and center on their website, you can get to all the documents there. That's where you can find this information. And it went into a good deal of helpful detail on how individuals with self-employment income who perhaps file a 1040 Schedule C would document their expenses to their lender with or without employees, as well as how some other types of partnerships would file those as well. So on the EIDL side, you're also eligible to apply for an EIDL, economic injury disaster loan, as your own business as an independent contractor. And if I haven't answered that or you have a follow-up, I'd be happy to take that.
There is a follow-up asking how long is it taking for companies to receive the EIDL funds after the application has been submitted to SBA?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is longer than anyone would hope. We've seen dispersals beginning on those loans. What happened is that there were actually in the desire to get the program out and going as quickly as possible, in response to the governor's request to make these loans available as became across the country, SBA started with the same process it uses for ordinary disasters, if there ever is such a thing as an ordinary disaster. And that portal really was not able to adequately handle the volume. There was an interim solution, and that quickly transitioned to what's up there now. Now there is a much more streamlined application, and the process of syncing those 3 different processes so that the people who applied first and early didn't lose their place in line took place, and those dispersals are starting to happen. So I can't give you an exact answer, but it appears to be taking a couple of weeks to get those answers for businesses. And what we're told is that, unfortunately, in our office, because those loans are made by our SBA Office of Disaster Assistance, we don't have access in Wyoming into that portal. We don't have a way to check on the status of your application for you. We wish we could. And so the best solution is a frustrating solution, which is to call the customer service number and to follow up with them. And we really hope that process starts moving more quickly soon. Thank you for the question.
All right, well, I think what I would like to do now, I don't know if we have any other questions from the audience, and those may still come in, so we'll hold tight on those, but we might want to just have a few final thoughts from Pete and from Director Cooley and Karen and Amy, just to kind of wrap things up. And if anybody else in the panelists that would like to chime in or ask a question, I think that would be great. Pete, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Josh, for putting this together and for having all of us on. Obviously, there's a lot going on here, and so folks are, as you're looking for information and need people to reach out, feel free to. Obviously, I think I can speak on behalf of the Business Council and say reach out to them, or Amy or Director Cooley or anyone here that you need to. If you need to be directed and it's easier to contact the association, please feel free to do that. I'll give out our number, which is 307-234-5333. That's the Petroleum Association's number, 307-234-5333. And you're welcome to email me as well. And that email is just Pete, like that there, pet@pawyo.org. pete@pawyo.org. Thanks so much. Really are interested in listening to what each of you are needing, because it's not all the same. What some of the larger E&P companies need is not quite the same as what perhaps a small mom and pop needs. And so we want to make sure that we're capturing everything to have the best chance of success. So don't be afraid to reach out.
Cool. Thanks, Pete. Director Cooley, anything you'd like to add?
Sure. I just wanted to provide a comment to one of the, wasn't a question, it was a comment on the chat screen that talked about money that's really needed immediately for operators, just to be able to hang on during the short term while this is occurring. And frankly, I hear you. I appreciate what you're saying, and that's not just for oil and gas operators. That's for your barber downtown, or your whatever the small businesses across Wyoming. That's the situation. What can be done in order to tide people over through this, so that we don't have at the end of this small businesses that are being required to close down. I think what I would say to that in response is just that keep your eye on what the federal government continues to do. I know we've got several more iterations of funding coming out. I would encourage everyone to hang on as long as you can with this, because I think additional help is coming. With that, I would also encourage you, if you've got businesses around you or your own employees that are asking questions about some of the funding options that are coming through Workforce Services, please send them to our website. I think that's the easiest place to find a lot of this good information that we have out there that's continually being updated. And that's where also we'll be announcing additional information with regard to potential layoff aversion funds. And with that, I would just thank you again for having me here today.
Great, thank you very much. All right, Amy Lee.
Thank you so much. I would say that your lenders around the state have done an amazing job of implementing and making available the PPP loans. And as of numbers that were released yesterday, they had done thousands of loans for nearly $750 million in Wyoming. And so they can be a great resource, and they've really been getting online. And unlike the EIDL, those loans have already started dispersing. We're really hopeful that if the limit of funding in that program is reached, that there will be another tranche available. So keep your eye on that, if that might be a potential resource for you. Just know that we're in your corner, and we really truly appreciate what's going on, and knowing that we're all in it together, and we're gonna come through this together. So thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Karen.
Hi, Josh. Thank you for the opportunity. I guess what I'd like to share is if there are any questions or concerns, we update our website constantly as OSHA updates guidance and different things that employers can use. So please feel free to check that and contact us via email or our phone anytime. We're happy to help.
Great, thank you. And with that, I don't see any other questions coming in. And I would just like to thank our panelists for the amount of effort they put in to be here today. I know that everyone who is on this panel is working like mad to help their organizations and really help the public work through this particular crisis. It means a lot for them to spend some time with us and help. And I know that they would do it again at 4 o'clock if we would like them to, because I see that dedication and we really appreciate it here. I'd also like to thank Warren for handling the logistics of the call. This is really good. I'm sure he'll come back on and tell everybody that the recording will be available and all of that. So thanks for Warren for all of your work there. And then Sarah Fitzgerald for helping put this together. She's a bit of our energy expert in our office at the Wyoming Business Council. And really more than anything, we do want to thank everyone for joining in today and sharing your thoughts. And we know it's a super tough time. We also realize how important oil and gas is to Wyoming's economy, not just directly, but indirectly. It's a real huge impact, and we understand that it's our job to help make it through there. And so with the help of folks like Pete and Director Cooley and Amy and Karen, we really do appreciate all of your efforts out there in the field and appreciate your comments. We do have a website up on the screen right now, wyomingbusiness.org/COVID-19, that if you were unable to get your question asked, or you think of a question later that you'd like to put in, at the bottom of that page is a form where you can fill that information in and supply it to us, and we'll find somebody to answer it or get you a response back. So we, again, thank you for your time today. We wish you best of luck in the coming weeks and continue to everybody work together. And as Amy said, I think we'll make it through this. But thank you again, and we'll be signing off now.